everybody. On behalf of the Highland Park Public Library, we'd like to welcome you to Library in Your Living Room. We are pleased to present Shelf Isolation, a weekly mini-series about books, culture, and what to read next. I'm Sara, and this is your Information and Reader Services Department. In this episode, we are excited to share with you what we've been reading, watching, and or listening to during self-isolation. And to begin our mini-series, I'm going to turn things over to Readers Roundtable expert and moderator, Michelle.
Thanks, Sara. So I'm sure you all remember the last time, weeks ago, I said that I was reading The End of Day by Bill Clegg. Well, I'm still not done with it, so I guess I'm not going to talk about that with you today. I'm about 75% done, so hopefully maybe next time I'll actually be done so I can tell you about it. But other than that, I can talk about a game today. Me and my friends have been playing this really great new game. It's for the computer, it's on Steam, it's called Phasmophobia. It is an indie horror game where you can play single player or with 3 of your friends and you are ghost hunters. You have a van, you pull up and there is a haunted location, you know certain facts about it, and you have to find out more information. There's lots of different ghost hunting gadgets that you use, and you can find out what kind of ghost it is, have certain things, and the more tasks you finish, the more money you can make, and the more ghost hunting supplies that you can purchase for your future ghost hunting endeavors. It is super scary. I will not play it by myself. I still won't play it very well. I get very, these ghosts are super scary and they can kill you. It's super, super fun. As I said, it's for Steam. You have to pay for it, but definitely it's worth the money to me. I've put many hours into it and it's just super, super fun. So I definitely highly recommend that if you do have a Steam account to definitely check out Phasmophobia. So that's actually all I have to talk about today. So I'm going to pass it on to Stephanie.
Thank you, Michelle. Surprisingly, I read about murder. And anyway, the first one I did was a psychological thriller. It was by Wendy Walker, and it's called Don't Look for Me. If you want a book that is a real page turner, this is the one for you. It starts out with this family in Connecticut. There's a wife, son and daughter, and a husband. It's the anniversary, the 6-year anniversary of the death of their 3rd child. And you kind of find out bits and pieces as the story goes along of what happened on that tragic day. But the story has the mother driving to her son's private prep school where he's playing football to see him play. And then she's driving back and she has to go through kind of a really isolated, kind of creepy area. And she runs out of gas. And there's also a horrible storm that's coming. So she gets out of her car and she can see that the storm's coming. But when she walks to the gas station, everything's boarded up. And so a truck comes by and asks, because now then the rain that's coming down and she's completely covered and she's drenched. And so his truck pulls up with a man and a little girl, and they ask her, can we give you a ride? So she's like, oh, sure, because she's thinking, well, it'll be fine because there's a child in the truck. So she gets in the truck, and she says, just drop me off at this hotel. The hotel's boarded up, of course, because of the storm. Basically, the whole town's boarded up. So the man just says, you can stay to town, the next day. That didn't happen. So then the story goes back and forth between this Molly, the mother who is being held captive, and the search for her. And so the book goes day 1, day 14. At day 14, the search ends. They're not looking for her. This guy starts like giving her like a newspaper article showing that they've stopped searching for her. In the meantime, the little girl is very creepy. She's very needy. She wants to be held, but then she can turn on a dime, like just completely go psycho. So the lady's trying to figure out how to play along. And like I said, it's a real page turner. It's really, you're just like, who is it? Is it the husband? Is it the sheriff? Is it this person? Is it that? It's just a really great book. And it was recommended by one of my co-workers. So I'd like to say thank you to her because it really was worth my time. And then the next one I read, which is a series that I like, it's called Murder at Queen's Landing. And this one's by Andrea Penrose. And it's the 4th in the Rexford and Sloane. They're historical mysteries. And this one has Charlotte Sloane, Lady Charlotte, and then the Earl of Rexford. And they have a tendency to stumble upon murders that take place, usually involving their friends, and then they have to try to go along and solve these murders. It has 2 orphans that Charlotte is now the legal guardian of, so they remind you of Oliver Twist-like characters. One is named Hawk and the other is Raven, and their network of street friends help to solve these mysteries. And this one, it's really good, it's really enjoyable. You learn more about the characters because Charlotte, for a number of years, has not been part of the high society. She ran off with her art teacher. So she's just slowly coming back. Her husband, who was the art teacher that she had as her tutor at home, he ended up passing away. So he used to go under a name A.J. Quill, and he does basically cartoons about what's going on, kind of making fun of the upper crust of society and little scandals and stuff that are going on, and publishes them. Well, Charlotte does this now too on top of that. And if you just like historical mysteries, this one, it's really good. I highly recommend that you start at the beginning, because then you learn about the characters and the stories build through each book. So those are the only 2 stories that I have for you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gus.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. Those sound pretty interesting. I like my scary stuff as well. So this week, I wanted to recommend something in honor of our coworker, Jackie. I think she would appreciate this one. But I think she recommended this a long time ago, but I don't care. I'm going to recommend it anyway. I'm going to do it again. There's nothing better for me, at least, than to read and drink coffee. But I read this one book called Craft Coffee by Jessica Easto and Andreas Wellhoff, which is Jackie's nephew, I believe. So it's an excellent book about craft coffee and different methods of how to get the perfect cup of coffee. I'm a very boring coffee person. I just do plain old black American coffee and Greek coffee, but I wanted to step it up. I'm embarrassed, as a Greek person too. I mean, we have really, really good coffee. I needed to step it up. So this book, it's a very wordy book. There's not a lot of pictures in it, but it's a very wordy coffee book. But if you want to educate yourself on the topic, you want to step it up like me, check it out. It talks about brewing techniques, French press methods, pour over methods, things like that. And also how to decipher the coffee bag label. I mean, I look at a coffee bag label and I think it just says coffee beans. I don't know. I'm very, as you can see, I'm uneducated when it comes to coffee. It was a really good book, and I highly recommend it. Jackie also has recommended it, so that's 2 of us are saying it's good, so you know it's good. Also, what I've been doing is I've been playing, you guys know me as a frugal person, a video gamer and a frugal video gamer. So Black Friday, there were some really good deals on some games, and I just picked one up that I've been meaning to play for a long time. It's called Resident Evil 3. It's for the PlayStation 4 and it's for the Xbox One. Rated M. It's rated M, so be careful. If you guys are familiar with Resident Evil, it is very, very scary. Resident Evil 3 came out many, many years ago for the original PlayStation, but they redid it for the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox, and it's supposed to be really good. I think I'm the opposite of Michelle. Michelle plays it. She can't play it on her own. Me, I want to play like me. I'll play this at the witching hour, 3 a.m. in the dark if I have to. It's supposed to be really scary. Excited to start playing it. And that's all I have for today. And with that, I'll go ahead and give it to Katie.
Thank you, Gus. I haven't been on for a while, so I have a backlog of books to talk about. First, I also wanted to go back to one of Jackie's recommendations. I just finished Magic for Liars by Sara Gailey. They're a fantastic writer. I really liked their book, Upright Women Wanted. This is a full-length novel. They really write well. This one just sucked you into the world as well. There is a magic user, and this is actually about the sister of the magic user, the twin sister, who has no magic, but has to solve a whodunit in this magic school, which is very much not Hogwarts. It's just like a terrible public school that happens to have magicians in it. I really liked it. It's really tight, really no wasted words. She's talking about how she's a liar and explaining why she felt these things, and then saying, okay, I could have told you this, but really, this is why I did this. I wanted to see this magic world and be part of it. And it kind of explores those feelings of like jealousy that you would have, of course, if your twin was a magician and you weren't. I really liked it. If you don't really like fantasy stories, it's kind of just a whodunit with fantasy sprinkled on top. If that's your thing, try this one. I also wanted to talk about another book that is kind of a whodunit with fantasy sprinkled on top, which is Gideon the Ninth. Okay, so the backstory is this is a world where it's ruled by a necromantic emperor for the last 10,000 years. And he has 9 houses, and every house has their own planet or multiple planets. So that sounds a little bit out there. Really, though, it's a locked room mystery, because the emperor's like, oh, hey, everybody who's the head of these houses, come visit me on this planet, and we'll talk about who's going to be my successor. Okay, cool. Everybody comes to this house. There's nothing for them to do. What are they supposed to do? They just explore the house. The house has all of these locked rooms. Okay, let's go into them. And then suddenly people start dying for no reason. What is going on? Who is this emperor? How did he live for 10,000 years? What's all this necromancy stuff? And why is the main character always in corpse paint? Like she paints her face as a skull. It's amazing. I love it. The narrator is super snarky and just is like, I hate everything. I hate this place, but I have nothing else to do, so why not explore this? The other one I wanted to talk about is Ring Shout. Okay. This is a tiny little novella. It's about 150 pages. This is by Djeli Clark. He's amazing. I need to read all of his novellas after this one because from like page 5, he just grips you by the shirt and just, you're in. It felt like really cinematic, the way that everything progressed. You could tell that it was like beginning, rising action, falling action, but I could like see this playing out as a movie, and it should be a movie with the success of Lovecraft Country. It's very much in that kind of theme. Basically, the clan are so driven by hatred that some of them are turning into literal monsters. Where are these monsters coming from? Who's controlling these monsters? Why do these monsters want to eat dead dogs? Gross, but also fantastic, and I need to find out more. The way that he writes is fantastic. He like went into Gullah, like the Gullah accent. I think that's a island off of one of the Carolinas. But he like talks in the Gullah accent. I had to like read those portions out loud because I was like, I have no idea what this is saying. Okay, I understand phonetically what she's trying to say. The depth of research that he went into for this book, guns and running and things on fire, and also destroy the clan. He didn't have to, but it's such a cherry on top of a perfect little novella. Fascinated by this. I want to see more from him. I want a 500-page book about what he eats for breakfast. He's that good of a writer. Just fantastic. The next two I want to talk about are A Memory Called Empire and then Black Sun. So we're still in space is more of a sci-fi kind of thing. They are trying to send off this empire who is in control of most of the galaxy. This emperor is kind of Aztec flavored, but it's kind of interesting. I really liked the push and the pull in this novel is really about the main character loves this empire. She's read about it since she was little, but she's never been part of it. So going into this place where she's really an admirer of the culture, but realizing how little she actually knows, how little these people think about her. Like she talks about all these words that they use to talk about barbarians, which just means people who aren't us. Why are they calling us barbarians? I'm not a barbarian. I know so much about you, but then there's like a slam poetry contest that just comes out of nowhere. And she's like, I have no idea how to do slam poetry, and I feel extremely isolated, and I hate this, and I love this. I just want to go home. And I absolutely understand that. It's like talking about these feelings of self-isolation and also about feeling alienated from something that you love. Push and pull against this imperial force, which is really fantastic. It's also a mystery because her predecessor has just been murdered. Who did it? I don't know. How did he die? We don't know. How long has he been dead? Who knows? Maybe a couple months? So she has to figure all of this out while also being a diplomat, not offending people, and not knowing anybody who to trust. I really liked it. Keeps the action up while also keeping that cultural, like, hey, do I fit in? No, I don't fit in. How do I feel about not fitting in? And it's really well balanced. So I'm excited about that. The next book in the series, A Desolation, called Peace. I believe it's coming out in March. I want to get my hands on that. The last one I wanted to talk about is Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. This book is amazing. So you can read the first chapter online on Tor.com. Read that prologue and see if you like this book, because it is an intense book. It starts off with this boy whose mother gives him a lot of drugs and does this magical ceremony with him, and then she throws herself off of the balcony. Pretty intense. If that's not for you, you're not going to enjoy this book. If you do enjoy that and you need to find out why did this woman just throw herself off a friggin' balcony, okay, let's get into it. I love this book because Roanhorse has made this fantasy land that's kind of pre-Columbian America inspired, which you've never seen before. Setting feels really fresh and interesting. It's kind of Aztec inspired. It's kind of about the city as a character, which I really am into, having grown up in Chicago. But also, like, all of these characters are right. So this one person who's a career politician, she's like, hey, everybody's untrustworthy and out to get me. And she's absolutely right, because they are out to get her because she's a career politician. Somebody else is like, hey, this city is terrible and I hate it. Yeah, okay, they're absolutely right. So many times in fantasy novels, you can tell which character is supposed to be the right one. You can't tell that in this. Everybody has their own point of view, and their own point of view is right from where they're standing, which I really, really enjoyed. The one thing I hate about this book is it's very clearly setting up for a sequel. Like, the last 10 pages, I was like, you can't end here. You can't end here. Why are you ending here? No, you can't do this. And then she ended it, and I was like, how dare you, Rebecca Roanhorse? I need to camp outside of your publisher because I need the second part of this book. So if you don't like cliffhangers, I'm sorry, but you absolutely should read this book because it's amazing. I highly recommend it. I feel like I could go back to this several times and pick up stuff that I did not catch the first time. I really love her voice. Everything just felt like authentic. It feels a little bit like Game of Thrones in that every single character is doing things that make logical sense. All see different characters as good or bad, but there's not really a good or bad. It's like, it all depends on your perspective. I want this to continue. I want there to be 10 books. I want her to get a Game of Thrones contract from HBO because it needs to happen. Now that I'm done fangirling, I want to move it over to Karen.
Thanks, Katie. And now for some nonfiction, a departure for me and a departure for a lot of us, I think. But Ben MacIntyre is the author of the book I read. The book is called Agent Sonya. And Ben MacIntyre is an author who had been recommended to me several years ago by a patron. And I just never got around to reading any of his books until I spotted this on the shelf recently. It's, as I said, a departure for me. It reads like a mystery or suspense story, even though it's true. And it exposed a lot of my lack of knowledge about the Cold War. And I also learned about espionage more than I knew from my spy novels. So anyhow, Ursula Kuczynski is Sonya. Her code name is Sonya. She grew up in a prosperous Jewish family in Berlin. I think she was born around 1908. And she became a communist in her teens. And she was recruited as a spy when she was living in China in her early 20s. And at the time, she was 6 months pregnant with her first child. She was there because her husband was working in Shanghai as an architect. Having a family was good cover, it turned out. Along the way, she went to several different countries: China, Moscow, Poland, Switzerland, and she was in Great Britain in at least two places. She started this work in her 20s, and she did it for about 20 years. Married twice, had 3 children. The organization she worked for, it was in the Soviet Union. It was called the Center for short. It had all sorts of different names, which kept changing, and all kinds of acronyms. They recruited her. She rose within the organization until she was recruiting her own network and running her own network of spies. It must have been quite a stressful existence. It's really interesting to read about, but you know how we move, we call AT&T or Comcast, have our Wi-Fi cable set up. These people, the center tells you where you're going, gives you some cash, puts it in a dead drop location for you, a secret place, and you go to your new apartment or your new house and you say, where will we put the radio transmitter? And you go out to the hardware store or stores and you buy your supplies and you build your own radio transmitter, because regularly you are transmitting or you're sending messages to the center from wherever you are. And this is pretty dangerous because the country you're in, they could detect the transmitting of people in their homes. And you might find you had to move your transmitter to maybe somebody else, another spy's basement or the shed or something, if you were worried about being detected. Speaking of dead drop sites, where she would get her pay and she would get her instructions by going to a secret location. There was a ritual connected with it. She'd appear there, come back 10 days later, drop a piece of chalk on the sidewalk, all kinds of elaborate things. It was amazing the potential for mistakes. And there was a mistake made. There was a misunderstanding between the center and Sonya about where she should pick up her instructions. And somebody counted the number of trees wrong. It was hidden in a tree root in this English town. And she was out of contact with her handler for more than 2 years. And that means no pay, no instructions, worrying if maybe you've been fired or what is going on. But she one day just bicycled up to this tree, and the book says, out of habit, without much hope, she reached down into the tree root, and here's some money and new instructions, and everything was okay. But this is what she supported her family with if her husband was out of a job, the money from this espionage. She left Britain for Berlin in 1950, worked in the East German government propaganda office for a while, and then began writing books about her life, both fiction and nonfiction, under a pseudonym. She was never, quote, caught, I guess. That she was not put into a labor camp or prison, anything like that. She kind of reinvented herself, became a writer, and was pretty well known. She lived until she was, I think, 93, died in 2000. The book, I have to say, is only about 300 some pages, and it went a little slowly for me. The author was very helpful in that he would, he made it interesting. He would bring up a name from the past and he'd helpfully say, the man she met in X city, or, or he would refer to what the person was. So you wouldn't have to go paging back constantly to figure out who these people were. But there were a lot of characters. The author had help from Ursula's children, their cooperation, and he had access to the files on the family in the British and German National Archives. So he had a lot of material, and I'm sure this is just, as long as it is, it's just a distillation of what he found out. It was pretty easy to pick up, do something else, come back a few days later, and remember where you were, because it was not, it's a complex story, but I think it was told in an uncomplicated way and helpful to the reader. So I recommend it. In fact, there's a reading list or a selected bibliography in the back, and it's tempting to start reading some of these books just because now I got this interest. So anyway, I do recommend it. And next we will hear from Sara.
Thanks, Karen. So the first book I have this week is another romance, and I should start out warning you that this did not come out until March, but I was lucky to get an advanced reader copy. So this is Act Your Age, Eve Brown. It's the third of the Brown Sisters series by Talia Hibbert. I've talked about the other two, about Chloe and Danny Brown, on here before. In this one, Eve's the youngest sister. She's kind of spoiled. She's never really had a career. Like, she's tried different things, but failed out of college. Her most recent one was trying to be a wedding planner, and there was a fight with a bridezilla that ended with doves being released. But her parents decide they're going to cut her off. She has to go get a job. She is so angry. She just goes for a drive. and ends up at this bed and breakfast that has a sign saying that they're hiring. So she goes into the interview, and I now cannot remember the guy's name because I finished this last week, but he is interviewing for a new chef. And he thinks she is completely unprofessional because, of course, remember, she just left the house after a fight with her parents. She wasn't like dressed for an interview or anything. He thinks she's horribly unprofessional. He doesn't like her. He's like, there's no way we're going to hire her. She leaves. And his best friend who's helping him interview her, oh, his name is Jacob. Now I remember. Jacob's best friend says, you know, well, we've seen all these other people today. You haven't liked any of them. She's the best one out there. So he goes to stop her and offer her the job, but she is backing her car out to drive away and hits him with her car. So then as he is recovering from his broken wrist and concussion, she has to help out at the bed and breakfast. So it's really funny. They do not like each other to begin with, but become friends and then more. And it's very cute, set in an English town. I actually think it would be great for Christmas because there's like a gingerbread competition involved, but it doesn't come out until March. But if this sounds at all interesting, the first 2 books in the series are already out and are wonderful. And so I highly recommend the whole series. The second book I have this week, completely different, is Djeli by Margaret Atwood. It's her new collection of poetry, just came out a couple weeks ago. It's a pretty short little collection, first collection of poetry she's had out in about 10 years. I listened to this on audio, and I have to highly recommend the audio because it is read by the author herself. So if you're just looking for like an hour and a half, I think it was an hour 45 minutes, of hearing Margaret Atwood read you her own poetry, it's wonderful. I have like a 40-ish minute drive to the library, and I listened to my audiobook slightly sped up. So I listened to the whole book on the way to and from the library yesterday, and it was lovely. And I highly recommend it. And I'll also mention, if you like hearing Margaret Atwood read her own work, she had a short story collection a couple of years ago called Stone Mattress. On the audio, there are several stories read by different authors, but she does read one of them. She actually reads the title story, Stone Mattress. So with that, I will pass it along to Nancy.
Thank you, Sara. Well, we're going to talk of romance of a different kind up here in the archives. Sometimes people, of course, call to do research on history and development and housing development. And this week, we had a couple of researchers actually researching what's called the Crenindado, the Highland Park Highlands. It's on the north, kind of west side of Highland Park. You can see here, that's the bike path. It was electric railway. And it was Edith Rockefeller McCormick and her paramour and his partner bought a farmstead, the Sweeney farmstead, which is an Irish family, in 1925, and started to develop it. And of course, the crash came and there are only some houses developed. So most of the homes and some of the streets, beware, some of the street names and all the numbers have changed up here. There was really only a few homes built at that time in this subdivision. People were calling to research it because Highland Park, as it was founded post-Treaty of Chicago, is at least four times bigger geographically now, and there are various subdivisions added on throughout the years up to the 1950s post-World War II boom. We also documenting this subdivision. It's called Highland Park Gardens, Highland Park Highlands, Crenindado, and Mrs. McCormick and Cren, who were having an affair for a very long time. When it had one of the homes built for them, but by the time it was built, they either weren't getting along or something. They were in court, I think. And according to lore, I've never seen any primary documentation of this, so I don't know that it's true that German POWs would escape from the army base, Fort Sheridan, which was east of the tracks, and hide there, and were found there later. We do up here in the archives have lots of documentation of these developments and how they developed. They can be very helpful for various reasons. One professor is currently doing some research on post-World War II housing and affordable housing and diversity and equity, and she's been using some of our works for that. Have a look at our catalog, and also in addition, we have pictures of the farm that was there and farmland that was there before it was purchased and turned into a subdivision pre-1925. So as far as readings, we're going to talk about the same era. Recently, I read a book by Bulgakov, who's most famous for Master Margarita, but he also wrote quite a lot of short stories, especially in his youth when he was a doctor. And they're in various compilations, and I read one of them is called Morphine, and it's in the series of a diary that he's writing by a friend that he finds after his friend succumbs to his addiction. But in fact, Bulgakov had an addiction problem with morphine. And the story is actually very poignant and relevant in that he talks about how he had the initial morphine injection because of a reaction to a drug. And then that developed an addiction. And when he's at the psychiatry hospital in Moscow, he's pleading with the doctors saying, please try and understand, I'm not a weak person. I've always been, he wouldn't use the term overachiever, and I've accomplished so much, and I always was a good student, but this has overtaken me and I need help. So it's very interesting, if you look at stories today, you see how people with opiate addiction in this country you see similar stories. So I thought it was interesting. I also was really excited because one of my favorite actors, Leonard Bishopin, in 2008, starred in a movie version of the short story novella Morphine. It's on YouTube, and you can choose what language you want to have the subtitles. I would say the translation I read of the short story was sublime, just excellent. And I also understand there's a series done of these short stories in England with John Hamm, but I have not seen it. But I can't imagine he's better than Leonard Bishopin, which obviously I'm one of my favorite actors, a great Russian young man actor. And with that, I will hand it off to Catherine.
Well, I've been on Gothic novels again. And once again, I read a 19th century novel and then a modern novel that was inspired by it. So I read Melmoth the Wanderer by Charles Maturin, who was an Irish clergyman. And this is sort of high Gothic romance, I think really the last big novel of that period. And it starts off with John Melmoth, who is a poor student in Dublin. And he's living on just a little bit of money that he's sent by his miserly uncle. And the uncle is dying, so he goes to see him in his sort of decrepit mansion. And the uncle does die, but first he tells him about his basically secret closet that only he's allowed to go into, and sends him in there to get some stuff. And while John Melmoth is in the closet, he sees this creepy looking portrait of his ancestor, which is dated from 1649, which would have been about, I think, 125 years previous to the time period that we're in here. And he thinks, wait a minute, I've seen that guy. So that's a little weird. And then he's reading this manuscript that his uncle had told him, well, I've consigned this to you and you should probably burn it, but you can read it before you burn it if you want, but I recommend that you don't. So of course he reads it. And that gives us the first part of the story of Melmoth. And basically Melmoth is his ancestor of John Melmoth, who sold his soul to the devil in exchange for 150 extra years of life, in which time he's trying to pass the contract off to somebody else and get out of the whole problem. It wasn't that clear to me why he wanted to live for an extra 150 years in the first place, but anyway, that's what he did. And so Melmoth is just kind of, the younger Melmoth, our Melmoth, is just sort of figuring this out when all of a sudden on the shore nearby there's a shipwreck. And there's one survivor, a Spaniard, and we start to get his tale, which, you know, coincidentally, because it's a high Gothic novel, is somehow related to Melmoth. So he's telling his tale, and then it comes out some of his own experience, some manuscripts that he's read, and it goes on and on and on. This book is 600 pages long. Some of the language is archaic. I recommend this really only if you're really, really into the Gothic and you've read most everything else. I didn't hate the book, but I have to say, this is a big time commitment. I was left with a question. I will just give you this little spoiler. In Spain, in probably around 1800, if you get married and it turns out the priest who marries you was undead, is your marriage legal? The book never answered that question. But there's a lot involved. There's a lot of characters. A lot of it's in Spain. There's the Spanish Inquisition. Those priests were very much alive, but just as evil. There's a lot going on here. But I was really interested to read Melmoth by Sara Perry, which came out just a couple of years ago. So in Melmoth, which I have to say is a normal length book, it's about 300 pages. In Melmoth, Sara Perry sort of conflates this character Melmoth with the legend of the Wandering Jew, which is a legend that arose in the medieval era about a person. There's a lot of versions of it. And in one version, the Wandering Jew is a person who cursed Christ as he was on his way to the cross, and as a result was condemned to wander the earth until the second coming. But the basic idea is that it's this character who wanders around and cannot die and is basically immortal. And so Sara Perry sort of also takes the structure of Melmoth where we get, or of Melmoth the Wanderer, where we have various accounts from letters, from journals, from in-person accounts, but it is set in Prague, and the main character is a young woman named Helen, who is a student, and she is friends with another academic and his wife, who is a little bit older, and she has recently suffered a stroke, and so things have gotten sort of unhappy in their relationship as a result. Where Perry really takes the story is toward the idea of the character of Melmoth as a witness. And so there's a lot of creeping guilt preying on the characters. And we sort of have this shrouded black figure who's appearing in the corners. And we sort of get the various stories of the guilt. You get the Gothic atmosphere, the streets of Prague, and this weird character. I have to say I liked some parts of the book more than others because you get different viewpoints, but still, a good Gothic novel, much more accessible than Melmoth the Wanderer. So this is a good, just fun one to pick up if you just like the Gothic. And then from there, I went to Mexican Gothic, which is unrelated to the other two books, except for just being another Gothic novel. This one is new. It's by Silvia Moreno Garcia. And it is basically just your solid, straightforward Gothic novel. It's set in 1950s in Mexico, and it starts out with Noemi, who is a little bit like Elle Woods, the character from Legally Blonde, in that she's this really fun socialite, but she's also pretty smart, and she's a student, and it's her ambition to go to graduate school in anthropology. And she's at a party dancing with her date, and she gets a call from her father who summons her to come back home. And she thinks it's because her dad doesn't like her boyfriend. And so she gets home and talks to him, and her father's like, yeah, I really don't like your boyfriend, but we have bigger fish to fry here. We got this like weird letter from your cousin who's recently married, and it sounds like she may be going insane. She says she can't get out of the house where she is. So I want you to go see her and try to sort this out and try to get her out of there if necessary, because when I've contacted her husband's family, they're just basically stonewalling me. Noemi goes to another region of Mexico. It's sort of this old mining town, and they go up and up and up the hill to this big creepy mansion, and it's everything you want in a Gothic mansion, and the whole family is super creepy, and her cousin Catalina is sick, but the family is hardly allowing her to see her at all. And it's a Gothic novel. It's no big surprise that this old creepy family with their old creepy mansion is somehow preying on the cousin and keeping her prisoner. And so the question is just how they're going to get out of this all in the end. So this was pretty satisfying. I was afraid going into it that I was going to be too scared by this book. It turns out I did not think it was scary at all, but there is some real horror toward the end, but it didn't affect me a whole lot. So I didn't have to hide the book under the bed. Well, I wouldn't hide it under the bed. That would be the worst place to hide a scary book. In the freezer. I did not have to put it in the freezer. It was fine. But if you want a fun Gothic novel, this is another good one. So that one and Melmoth. And from there, I will pass it to Lori.
I have two books to talk about today. The first one is by Fanny Flagg. It's her new book, The Wonder Boy of Whistle Stop, and it takes us back to Whistle Stop, Alabama, which if you read Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe, which is one of Fanny Flagg's earlier books, it takes you back and tells another story of Whistle Stop, the story of Bud Threadgood, who lived with his mother and an aunt by choice in the back of the cafe. And then it follows his life as he grows up and goes to college, and then it weaves in other characters that lived in Whistle Stop, and then as Whistle Stop becomes less of a town and falls apart. And I'm not going to go much more into it, but just to say that one of the things I like about Fanny Flagg's books is that I really like her characters. They seem like real people. They seem to have real issues, and they deal with them in kind of heartwarming or irritating ways. And I highly recommend this book. It's not a light read. It's not fluffy, but it's engrossing. I would imagine it's also very good to listen to, and I enjoyed it, and I recommend it. The other book I'm reading is a nonfiction book called My Wild Garden by the Israeli author Meir Shalev. He is writing about his garden in his home in I know I'm going to mispronounce it, the Jezreel Valley in Israel, and how he has taken this property that was kind of scrub and not taken care of, and he's brought a lot of the regular plants back in and restored it. And he's really witty. I don't know if you have read any of his other books. He writes fiction and nonfiction, but this book is really a pleasant book. The chapters are very short, and they're also beautiful paintings of the different plants and things that he talks about. I'm very grateful to whoever ordered this book. I found it on our new bookshelf, and I recommend that also. I think it would be a really nice book to give someone who likes gardening or writers writing about gardening. So those are the books I have to talk about for today. I also wanted to mention that even though the building is closed to the public, we are still here in the building. I'm here. Some of the others of us are here. We're taking phone calls at our regular number. We're taking chat at hplibrary.org. You can chat with us online. And you can also send us emails. We're taking holds. The holds are made available downstairs in the grab and go area. So we're still here. You can still get items, titles, books, CDs, movies, video games. So please, call us. We don't want to feel like the Maytag repairman, the loneliest person in the world. And also, if you need suggestions for things to watch from home, I would suggest you look at our Explore the World from Home page, which is on our website. If you scroll to the bottom of the home page, you'll see a link to it, or you can go to hplibrary.org/explore. And that finishes my talk for today, so I'm going to hand it back to Sara to take us out.
Thanks, Lori. So that's it for today, folks. As always, please remember that we are all here for you. We are available for comments, questions, or concerns that you may have, and you can reach us online through Facebook at facebook.com/HPLibrary, through our Twitter, which is @HPLibrary, or via email at hppla@hplibrary.org. Because the libraries and services can change suddenly due to COVID, it is best to contact us via email or chat or phone before coming to the library. Our music today was Carefree by Kevin MacLeod, and you can find more information about this and the titles we mentioned in our show notes below. Okay, everybody, this is us, signing off. Until next time, stay safe.